John Carter had always considered himself a seasoned diplomat. Years of navigating tense interstellar negotiations had honed his skills in understanding and respecting the diverse cultures across the galaxy. As the Earth ambassador, he'd seen it all, or so he thought. His latest mission, however, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Aora, a distant planet known for its rich history and enigmatic matriarchal society, had extended a rare invitation to Earth, and John was chosen to represent humanity. John's journey to Aora was filled with anticipation. The reports he'd read about the Aoran society were fascinating, yet shrouded in mystery. The Aorans valued unity and strength, but their customs were complex, often misunderstood by outsiders. As his ship approached the planet, John's curiosity was piqued by the vibrant colors and intricate designs of the Aoran landscape. Lush green valleys stretched out beneath a sky that shimmered with hues of purple and gold. The architecture was unlike anything John had ever seen, massive, organic structures that seemed to grow out of the earth itself, blending seamlessly with the natural environment. Upon landing, John was greeted by a delegation of Aoran dignitaries. They were tall, graceful beings, their skin glowing faintly under the soft light of Aora's twin suns. They welcomed him with a ceremony that, while unfamiliar, was undeniably respectful. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blossoms, and the gentle hum of melodic voices resonated in a language that John had only begun to understand. As they led him through the capital city, John couldn't help but marvel at the grandeur surrounding him. The streets were lined with flowers of every imaginable color, and the buildings, while enormous, exuded a sense of warmth and inclusivity. There was something almost ethereal about Aora, a sense of harmony and balance that made John feel both at ease and slightly overwhelmed. His hosts were polite, even reverent, as they explained some of the basic customs of their society. Yet, as they spoke, John noticed that there were many things left unsaid. There was a depth to their culture that he couldn't quite grasp, a series of unspoken rules that seemed to govern every interaction. But John, ever the diplomat, took it in stride. He assumed that with time, these nuances would reveal themselves, and he would be able to fully appreciate the complexities of Aoran life. The main event of his visit was a grand celebration, one that his hosts described as a gathering of the planet's most influential families. They assured him that this event would solidify the bonds between Earth and Aora, paving the way for a future of cooperation and mutual respect. John, eager to fulfill his role, accepted the invitation with enthusiasm. As he entered the grand hall where the celebration was to take place, John was struck by the opulence before him. The room was adorned with intricate tapestries that depicted scenes of Aoran history, their colors vibrant and alive with movement. The Aoran women, dressed in flowing garments that shimmered with every step, moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Their eyes, bright and knowing, glanced at John with a mixture of curiosity and something he couldn't quite place. The atmosphere was festive, filled with music that resonated deep within the soul. John was given a place of honor at the head of the table, surrounded by the most esteemed members of Aoran society. As the evening progressed, he engaged in conversations with various dignitaries, each of whom spoke passionately about the importance of unity and the strength that came from diversity. John, interpreting these words through the lens of Earth's diplomatic traditions, assumed they were discussing the potential for future alliances and cooperative endeavors. Yet, as the night wore on, John began to sense that something was off. The conversations, though polite, seemed to carry a deeper meaning, one that he was not privy to. There were subtle glances exchanged between the Aorans, and their words, while carefully chosen, hinted at something beyond mere diplomacy. John's instincts, honed by years of experience, told him that there was more to this celebration than he had been led to believe. Despite these nagging doubts, John dismissed them as the natural confusion that often arose when dealing with unfamiliar cultures. He told himself that everything would become clear in time, that this was simply another step in building a strong, interplanetary alliance. And so, he continued to enjoy the festivities, unaware of the monumental misunderstanding that was about to unfold. As the evening progressed, the tone of the celebration shifted subtly but unmistakably. The laughter and casual conversations that had initially filled the hall were now replaced by a solemn, almost reverential atmosphere. The music, once lively, took on a more ceremonial rhythm, echoing off the walls in a hauntingly beautiful melody. John couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen, but the specifics eluded him. He began to notice the odd behavior of those around him. The Aorans, who had been so warm and welcoming, now seemed to carry an air of expectation, their gazes lingering on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Cryptic remarks were whispered in his direction, comments about his role and destiny. But when he pressed for clarification, the responses were evasive, wrapped in layers of cultural nuance that he struggled to decipher. John's unease grew as he was gently guided to a central platform, its surface adorned with intricate symbols that pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow. The room hushed as he took his place, and a path cleared before him, revealing a procession of Aoran women, each more striking than the last, approaching in a slow, deliberate line. They surrounded him, forming a circle that seemed to hum with an energy all its own. The High Priestess, a towering figure draped in ceremonial robes that shimmered like liquid silver, stepped forward. Her presence commanded the room, her voice a melodious blend of authority and grace. She began to speak in the ancient Aoran tongue, her words resonating with the weight of tradition and history. Although John understood only fragments of the language, the gravity of her speech was unmistakable. As she spoke, it dawned on John that this was not the diplomatic gathering he had assumed it to be. The High Priestess's words, which initially seemed like a ceremonial welcome, began to take on a more personal tone. She spoke of unity, of bonds that transcended worlds, and of a unifier, who would bring together the most powerful families of Aora with the people of Earth. The realization hit John like a physical blow. This was a wedding, and he was the groom. Panic gripped him as the full implications of the situation crashed down on him. This was not just a symbolic gesture of goodwill. It was a binding union, one that would forever tie him, and by extension, Earth, to the Aorans in a way he had never anticipated. His mind raced, trying to find a way to extricate himself from this predicament without causing a diplomatic disaster. The Aorans, however, interpreted his hesitation as a natural earthling reluctance, a misunderstanding of their customs rather than outright rejection. The High Priestess paused, her gaze softening as she addressed John directly, her tone now soothing, almost maternal. She assured him that this union was a great honor, a gesture of immense trust and respect from the Aoran people. The room, sensing the tension, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. John's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. This was a scenario he had never trained for, a situation so far removed from his diplomatic experience that he felt utterly unprepared. Yet he knew that any overt refusal could be disastrous, potentially sparking a conflict that could extend far beyond this room. He had to tread carefully, to find a way to communicate his shock and confusion without causing offense. Struggling to maintain his composure, John attempted to explain the misunderstanding, his words stumbling out as he tried to convey that Earth's customs were different, that he had not come here with any intention of marriage. But his words, spoken in the formal galactic standard, seemed to lose their meaning in translation. The Aorans listened patiently, their expressions kind but uncomprehending. The High Priestess, mistaking his nervousness for a lack of familiarity with Aoran traditions, offered gentle reassurances. She spoke of the importance of this union, not just for Aora, but for the future of interplanetary relations. She promised that in time, he would come to see this marriage as a blessing, a bond that would enrich both worlds. John felt the weight of expectation bearing down on him, the eyes of every Aoran in the room focused on him with a mixture of hope and determination. He knew he was standing on the edge of a precipice, where one wrong move could tip the balance into chaos. His mind raced, searching for a way to navigate this situation, to find a solution that would honor the Aoran culture while allowing him to maintain his own autonomy. In that moment, John realized he was no longer just a diplomat. He had become a symbol, a living embodiment of the alliance between Earth and Aora. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined, and the path forward was anything but clear. As the ceremony continued around him, John knew that whatever happened next would change the course of his life, and perhaps the fate of two worlds, forever. The tension in the room was palpable as the High Priestess signaled for the next stage of the ceremony. With a solemn gesture, she called forth a group of attendants who carried ornate, jewel-encrusted boxes. They approached John with reverence, each step measured and deliberate, their faces reflecting the gravity of the moment. As the boxes were opened, John saw the contents, delicate, intricately designed bands that shimmered with a soft, ethereal glow. The unity bands, as they were called, were more than just symbols of marriage. They were the key to forming a permanent psychic bond between him and the Aoran women. John stared at the bands, trying to comprehend their significance. The concept of a psychic bond was entirely foreign to him, something beyond the realm of Earth's understanding. The Aorans, however, viewed these bands as sacred, a ritual that had been practiced for millennia. To them, the bands were not just ornamental but a spiritual connection that would unite their souls with John's in an unbreakable union. But to John, these bands represented a step too far. He had already been thrust into a situation he never anticipated, and now the idea of binding himself psychically to multiple alien women was overwhelming. He tried to reason with himself, searching for a logical explanation, but his mind was clouded by the sheer impossibility of the situation. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the bands as he struggled to find a way out. The hesitation did not go unnoticed. A murmur rippled through the room, growing louder as the Aorans began to realize that something was wrong. The High Priestess, sensing the unease, stepped forward, her eyes searching John's face for an answer. When he finally withdrew his hand, refusing to take the bands, the murmur turned into a collective gasp of disbelief. To refuse the unity bands was to reject the very foundation of the ceremony, and by extension, Aora itself. Panic spread like wildfire among the Aoran dignitaries and guests. John's refusal was interpreted as a blatant rejection, a slap in the face of their most sacred traditions. The atmosphere, once charged with anticipation, now crackled with fear and anger. The Aorans, who had welcomed John as a hero, now saw him as a threat to their way of life. Whispers of betrayal and dishonor filled the air, and the mood shifted from celebration to crisis in an instant. John, still reeling from the shock of the situation, was oblivious to the full extent of the damage his actions had caused. It wasn't until his translator, a young Aoran woman who had accompanied him since his arrival, urgently pulled him aside that he began to grasp the severity of the situation. Her voice, usually calm and measured, was now edged with desperation as she explained the catastrophic implications of his refusal. To the Aorans, his actions were tantamount to Earth rejecting Aora, a move that could shatter the fragile peace between their worlds and plunge them into conflict. The realization hit John like a punch to the gut. He had thought he was simply navigating an awkward cultural misunderstanding, but now he understood that he was standing on the brink of a galactic crisis. His refusal of the unity bands could be seen as an act of war, a rejection of not just the Aoran people but of their entire civilization. The stakes had never been higher, and one wrong move could lead to disaster. Desperately searching for a solution, John forced himself to calm down and think like the diplomat he was trained to be. He needed to buy time, to find a way to defuse the situation before it spiraled out of control. Drawing on his experience in negotiation, he approached the High Priestess with as much composure as he could muster. He explained, carefully choosing his words, that Earthlings needed time to understand and appreciate the deep significance of such a union. He suggested a period of reflection, a time for both parties to fully comprehend the implications of the bond they were about to form. The High Priestess listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she weighed his words. John could feel the tension in the room, the eyes of every Aoran present fixed on him, waiting for the outcome. He knew that this was his last chance to prevent a catastrophe, to steer the situation away from the precipice of war. After what felt like an eternity, the High Priestess finally nodded, agreeing to John's request for a delay. She announced that the ceremony would be postponed, allowing for a period of contemplation and mutual understanding. The room, still charged with tension, slowly began to relax as the Aorans accepted the compromise. John knew he had only bought himself a temporary reprieve. The threat of conflict still loomed, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. But for now, he had managed to avoid the worst, using his diplomatic skills to navigate through a minefield of cultural differences. As the ceremony was quietly disbanded, John couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had set in motion events that would change the course of history, events that were now. As the ceremony concluded and the room slowly emptied, a sense of calm began to settle over the Aorans. The High Priestess, recognizing the importance of John's position, requested a private audience with him. The earlier tension had not fully dissipated, but the air was now filled with a different kind of anticipation, a cautious curiosity about what was to come. During this meeting, the High Priestess shared with John a piece of their most sacred history, one that had been shrouded in mystery for generations. She spoke of an ancient prophecy, recorded in their oldest texts, that foretold the arrival of a unifier from beyond the stars. This unifier, the prophecy claimed, would come from a distant world to restore a lost bond between the Aorans and a race they had long considered extinct. The prophecy described the unifier as someone who carried within them the essence of this ancient connection, a bond that would once again unite the Aorans with their lost kin. As the High Priestess revealed this prophecy, John felt a strange sense of familiarity with the story. It was as if pieces of a puzzle were starting to fall into place, forming a picture he had not previously understood. The High Priestess explained that John's selection as the unifier was not a matter of coincidence or simple diplomatic strategy. It had been foretold in their most sacred texts, and his presence on Aora was the fulfillment of a destiny that had been set in motion long before he was born. John listened intently, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. The High Priestess continued, revealing that the Aorans had detected something unique in his genetic makeup, something that had signaled to them that he was the one they had been waiting for. His DNA contained markers that were identical to those of their ancient allies, a race that had once been deeply connected to the Aorans before they disappeared from the galaxy. The revelation hit John like a tidal wave. He struggled to process the enormity of what he was being told. The idea that his selection was due to a genetic connection with an ancient alien race seemed impossible, yet the evidence presented by the Aorans was undeniable. As the High Priestess spoke, memories of his own family history surfaced, stories passed down through generations, tales of mysterious visitors and strange occurrences that had always been dismissed as folklore. Could it be that these stories were more than just myths? John's thoughts drifted back to his childhood, to the whispered tales his grandfather had told him about their ancestors. There had always been something different about his family, something that set them apart from others. Now, for the first time, he began to understand the true significance of those stories. His bloodline carried the remnants of an ancient connection, one that had remained dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to be reawakened. The implications of this revelation were staggering. John was no longer just an Earth diplomat caught in an unfortunate misunderstanding. He was a key figure in a prophecy that could alter the course of galactic history. The Aorans, who had initially seen him as a mere representative of Earth, now regarded him with a reverence that bordered on awe. He was not just a tool in their diplomatic strategy. He was a living link to their past, a symbol of hope for their future. The weight of this realization settled heavily on John's shoulders. He knew that his decision would have far-reaching consequences, not just for himself but for both Earth and Aora. The Aorans were looking to him to fulfill a role that had been written in the stars long before he was born, a role that could unite their people with a lost part of themselves. John found himself at a crossroads. He had come to Aora as a diplomat, but now he was being asked to embrace a destiny that he had never imagined. The choice before him was monumental: to accept his role as the unifier and step into a future that was both uncertain and filled with potential, or to walk away, knowing that his refusal could lead to untold consequences for both worlds. As he contemplated his decision, John considered the future of Earth-Aora relations. This alliance, forged through the most unexpected of circumstances, could become a cornerstone of peace and cooperation in the galaxy. Yet, it would require him to embrace a part of himself that he had only just discovered, to accept a destiny that had been waiting for him in the shadows of history. In the quiet of the High Priestess's chamber, John made his decision. He knew that the path ahead would be challenging, filled with unknowns and potential dangers. But he also knew that he could not turn away from the responsibility that had been placed upon him. He would accept his role as the unifier, not just for the sake of Aora but for the future of both their worlds. The bond between Earth and Aora would be one of strength and unity, forged through his acceptance of a destiny that had been waiting for him all along. John knew that his acceptance of the role as the unifier had to be on his own terms, not just for his sake but for the future of both Earth and Aora. He couldn't allow himself to be bound by the psychic connections that the Aoran ceremony demanded. It was an alien concept to him, and one that he felt would not truly honor the values he held as a representative of Earth. Yet, he also understood the profound importance of this union to the Aorans, and the deep-rooted traditions that had brought them to this moment. Taking a deep breath, John approached the High Priestess with a proposal. He suggested a revised ceremony, one that would blend the traditions of both Earth and Aora in a way that symbolized their unity without compromising the values of either culture. The idea was to create a symbolic bond, one that honored the ancient prophecy and the Aoran customs, but also respected Earth's diplomatic principles. There would be no psychic bands, no permanent connections that bound him against his will. Instead, the union would be represented by a shared commitment to mutual respect, cooperation, and understanding. The High Priestess listened carefully to John's proposal, her expression thoughtful. There was a moment of silence as she considered his words, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Then, slowly, she nodded in agreement. She recognized the wisdom in John's approach, the way it allowed both cultures to honor their traditions without forcing a compromise that would leave either side feeling diminished. The Aorans, she declared, would accept this new ceremony, understanding that true unity was not in the psychic bonds they had once believed essential, but in the shared vision of a future built together. The revised ceremony was held in the Grand Hall, where the original celebration had taken place. This time, the atmosphere was different, more solemn, yet also more hopeful. The Aorans, dressed in their ceremonial attire, stood alongside John as the High Priestess led them through the new rites. Instead of the unity bands, John and the Aoran women exchanged symbols of their respective worlds, a gesture of goodwill and a promise to support one another as they faced the challenges of the galaxy together. The ceremony, though different from what the Aorans had initially planned, was a resounding success. The symbolic union was met with joy and approval by both the Aorans and John's Earth delegation, who had been following the events closely. The galaxy watched as the alliance between Earth and Aora was solidified, not through ancient rituals alone, but through a shared commitment to a future of peace and cooperation. The news of this unique alliance spread quickly, and with it came a wave of optimism that rippled across the stars. In the days that followed, the bond between Earth and Aora began to show its strength. The two worlds engaged in unprecedented levels of cooperation, sharing technology, knowledge, and cultural exchange. The Aorans, who had once been wary of outsiders, now embraced the partnership with Earth, finding in humanity a kindred spirit that valued unity in diversity. For Earth, the alliance brought new opportunities, expanding their influence and solidifying their place as a key player on the galactic stage. John's role as the unifier quickly became the cornerstone of this new era. He was not just a symbol of the alliance, but an active participant in its development. His diplomatic efforts ensured that the relationship between Earth and Aora remained strong, even as they navigated the complexities of their newfound partnership. The respect and admiration he had earned from both sides made him a respected figure throughout the galaxy, a bridge between two cultures that had once been worlds apart. As he reflected on the events that had brought him to this point, John couldn't help but marvel at how a simple diplomatic mission had turned into something so much more profound. He realized that the true strength of any alliance lay not in the rituals or the traditions, but in the understanding and respect that each side brought to the table. The experience had taught him the importance of embracing cultural differences, not as obstacles to be overcome, but as opportunities for growth and connection. Looking to the future, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. The alliance between Earth and Aora was just the beginning. There were countless other worlds, each with their own unique cultures and traditions, waiting to be explored and understood. The success of this union had shown him that even the most unexpected of partnerships could lead to incredible outcomes, and he was determined to continue fostering these connections, building a galaxy where diversity was celebrated, and unity was forged through mutual respect.